better. Okay, well, welcome to the 9th in our series of 16 audio-enabled EDA Step Workshop sessions. We're delighted you're here. My name is Annette, and I'm in full recovery from an eating disorder. Before we get started, a few caveats. This session of the EDA Step Workshop is being recorded. We hope to make audio recordings of the workshop accessible to everyone. Please note that these audios will not be available on the EDA website until they've gone through the full vetting process. We will, however, be sending information about the recordings to the GSB distribution list. If you're not currently on the GSB email contact list, please drop a line to info@eatingdisordersanonymous.org and we'll get you added. Reminder, listening to a recording is not a substitute for attending EDA meetings or working the steps. We encourage you to check out our meetings pages, which include face-to-face, online, and teleconference meetings. Just like what you might find at an EDA group, what you're about to hear reflect experiences and opinions of individual EDA members that may or may not tally with your own. Please take what you can use and leave the rest. You do not need a sponsor to attend this workshop. We'll all be working the steps of EDA together, including me. To make things easier on everyone, we've muted everyone as they join. If you'd like to be heard, please unmute your phone by hitting *6 on your phone or Alt-A if you're on a computer. You can mute and unmute by using the same key combination, *6 or Alt-A. Because there are so many of us, we won't all get a chance to introduce ourselves. However, if you're speaking, please do tell us your first name and where you're from. Last week, we discussed homework from the prior week, and we had Leslie, Emily, Kale, Michelle, and I sharing all our experiences with the last 6 topics in Step 4. Well, tonight, we're going to ask how things went for all of you. After that, we're going to start into Step 5. But it's important to remember that in this workshop format, we're practicing the process of working the steps. Perfection is a bar to progress, and therefore we're going to be making sure that everybody feels like they're part of the whole. We're not going to leave anybody out, even if you haven't finished everything. So please feel welcome, even if you're just now joining us for the first time. After a reflection on the EDA Big Book, pages 159 to 167, we'll hear some of EDA's sponsors addressing questions that sponsees often ask. Right now, I'd like to ask anyone on the call who sponsors others to please identify yourself, so we may call on you during the question and answer session. Now, this doesn't imply that you're currently accepting new sponsees. However, if you are, that would sure be great to know. Please tell us your first name and your city, please.
I'm Gisele from Maricopa, Arizona, and I sponsor. I'm in full recovery.
Thank you, Michelle, or thank you, Gisele.
I'm Nuria. I've recovered from an eating disorder, and I am in Charleston, South Carolina.
Thank you, Nuria.
This is Leslie in New York City. I am in recovery from an eating disorder, and I sponsor.
Welcome, Leslie. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Ellen, and I'm recovered from an eating disorder, and I'm calling from Houston, Texas.
Thanks so much, Ellen. Welcome.
Hi, this is Michelle. I'm in recovery from an eating disorder, and I sponsor, and I'm calling from Covington, Louisiana.
Welcome, Michelle. Thank you. All right, great. So what we'd like to do next, actually, is discuss the inventory homework. So last week, we had people fill out the horrifying last 6 topics on the EDA Step Workshop worksheets, pages 14 to 22. That's a lot of topics, and we wanted to check in to see how people were doing with that. Then we'll be talking about pages 159 to actually 167 and EDA Step Workshop worksheets 23 and 24, after which we'll talk about the panel of sponsors answering questions, and we'll go over the assignments for next week. Now, if you're like most of us, you probably didn't really feel like you did a totally comprehensive 4-step. Am I wrong? I'll bet that probably every single one of us feels like, oh my gosh, I can't believe we're at Step 5 already. I'm not done. Well, that's really okay. We're all works in progress, and we're never really fully done. Even if we fully recovered from an eating disorder, that doesn't mean that we're done learning life lessons and facing challenges on a pretty regular basis. So if you've considered your part and written out reasonable resolutions for the most troublesome items on your inventory, then you've just taken a huge step forward in your recovery. So at this point, I'm going to turn the discussion over to Nuria, who's prepared a little bit in the way of reflections about pages 159 to 167. Go ahead, take it away.
All right. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Yes, I'm Nuria. I'm recovered from an eating disorder, and I live in Charleston, South Carolina. And so here we are. It's step 5, and it picks up on page 159. So I'm going to try to go through as quickly as I can, picking out key points and, share my experience with it. So right from the beginning on page 159, it says, while steps 1 through 4 challenge our thinking and orientation to life, steps 5 through 9 challenge our discipline and willingness to live as we agreed we would in step 3. And when I think, okay, this discipline and willingness to live as we agreed we would in step 3, like I remember, okay, so when I did step 3, it was, in a simple format, like I made the decision that I was going to do this work. I was going to do what others had done before me to recover from my eating disorder. And step 5 is part of that process. Step 5 is part of that willingness that comes along, and which is step 5, admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. In the beginning, it starts to say, actually in the middle of this page, at the bottom of the middle paragraph, it says step 5 is the first true action step. Even though we've done a lot of work up till this point, this is the time where there's a lot of work in this, which we've already done, but to go and share all this information with someone, it's a big step. And, the biggest thing at the bottom of this page, well, for me, it was, our old habit was to turn to our eating disorders for comfort and release. Our new habit is new habit, right? Because we're trying to, our old way of living has not helped. Our old way of thinking and reacting to life has it's been a hot mess for us. And it's time to do things different. It's time to look at things differently. So our new habit is to turn to the comfort and security of a new perspective, which we achieve through continuous practice, relying on the idea of our God, higher power, or higher purpose regularly in our day-to-day lives builds resilience. Eventually, even in times of crisis, when we would normally have turned to our eating disorders, we will be able to rely on something else, something more meaningful to carry us through. And in step 5, the next part talks about how, we've done a lot to admit or to admit these things as we were writing down and breaking down, the different areas and, with the, 6 areas into this new formula. And we've discovered some truth about it. And we've looked and tried to see other resolutions instead of going back to our eating disorders, things that we can do differently, or how we can respond differently to the past. Okay, let's let that go and move forward. So, it says we need to admit the truth of our dysfunctional thinking behaviors, not only to ourselves, because we've done that, but also to others who can be objective and help us understand anything we might have missed in our step 4 inventory. And me, I look up, like, to me, objective is like a big word. So I look it up, and I have the little definition written over here: objective, not influenced by personal feelings or opinions, right? I have a lot of feelings about these things that I'm experiencing or have experienced, or opinions. So, the definition I looked up, it said not influenced by personal feelings or opinions in considering and representing facts. So to have someone else that is not, in my opinion, as emotionally involved with the past, to listen to what I already see and to help me pick out anything I might have missed along the ways, it, to me, was just so helpful. And at this point, I know, and we're going to go through this, but if you have had if you've had the opportunity to have an EDA sponsor take you up until this point, to share your 5th step with that EDA sponsor, for me, it's like, okay, well, it comes a lot easier. But we have to share it with whoever we can, and we'll go through certain suggestions with that. But, the biggest thing especially with me because of my past, there's a lot of trauma. And and over the next few pages, it brings up that victimhood. I was still letting the past affect my present day. And, the reality is like, and it even says on page 160, like nothing we can do will change what happened in the past. There's nothing. And I had to look at like nothing can change the past. But if I look at things differently, if I can react differently today, I have a chance, and it says we need to learn from our experiences, but ruminating on what we may feel was a raw deal, does no good. Little recovery can be found in reflecting on the other errors of others. I continued to give all this power to people from my past and point the finger. And like, I was not getting better. I was still the victim. And so it was time to look at things differently, try to see where was my part. And, and I always say, was it before, during, after? But anyways, that's tying into the 4th step. I'll try to stick to the 5th step. Our job in step 5 is to focus on what we thought, said, and did that put us in situations where we were vulnerable, threatened, and hurt. Did we lie to ourselves? Did we cheat people of our time and attention? It goes on and on. In 161, before we look at admitting errors and accepting feedback, it says, in general, we found we relied quite heavily on other people, like everyone, to take care of our most basic physical and our emotional needs when we should have been able to do that ourselves. So our goal of step 5 is to expose this thinking that lay behind our unhealthy dependence on healthy, as well as any thinking and behavior that was objectively wrong. And so it says admitting errors and accepting feedback. It builds objective. Step 5 asks us to express what we were thinking and doing in an objective way, reinforcing the habit of working on solutions instead of getting caught up in the problem. To me, these steps, it's like looking at, it does this spiritual awakening, this transformation, fundamental transformation. As a result of working these steps, I start to see things differently. I start not to focus on the problem and the past and pointing the fingers, and I start trying to see, okay, what can I do differently today? How can I respond? How can I rely on my higher power, my higher purpose to get me through similar situations if I have to encounter them? It says holds us accountable. Step 5 asks us to expose and admit the error in our thinking and behavior. I'm going to admit this to someone else. And I have to be honest about how I responded to life situations in the past, and like where I was wrong with the way I did it, and how can I try to respond differently. On page 162, it does bring up the victimhood that I mentioned already, so I'm going to get right to provides outside perspective. On page 162, step 5 asks us not only to admit our wrongs, but also requires us to own up to them with one or more people who can challenge our current thinking. Most likely, we are unable to be completely objective about what exactly is going on in our lives. Talking openly with at least one person gives them the opportunity to point out things that we might have overlooked, either consciously or unconsciously. Sometimes I don't even realize what I'm doing. I love this, where we said many of us found our sponsors and confidants completely nailed things we had not recognized at all that later turned out to be our biggest impediments. I mean, when I work hard on my 4 steps, I'm thorough and I just get right to work. But it is mind blowing how many times I've had someone listening to my 5th step, how they just have this outside perspective and they're able to point things to me. I'm like, whoa, because they're not so emotionally tied up. And it just boggles my mind how it helps me not just see things differently, but it opens my mind. And it sets me free of the past, and I feel more hopeful. This isn't to beat us up. It's like, okay, where did I go wrong? What can I try to do differently? And how can I use these tools to not go back to my eating disorder? And, with me, it's like even when I knew I had done things wrong in the past, and I was so full of shame and guilt, I rarely admitted it to anyone. And in my experience with that, it was like, it blocked me from people. I just felt lonely. I just felt yucky and crappy. And I never shared anything with anyone. And I think that bogged me down big time. And to do a fifth step and to admit my wrongs and to ask for help and ask someone for a different, or for that objectivity, to me, it took the power out of the eating disorder. It took the power out of my shame and guilt. I feel like it opened me up to set me free. And the next point, it says demonstrates willingness. I mean, wow, it's me sharing a fifth step with someone else and opening myself up to, that one person who's listening to my fifth step. I mean, I want to get better. I am willing to do what I need to do. And if you tell me that you shared your fourth step with someone else through a fifth step and you recovered, well, my gosh darn it, I'm going to do the same thing. Like, I'm showing willingness by sharing this with someone else. And I love how it's, on page 163, it says when we do this, it's a step 5 asks us to open ourselves up to feedback from others in order to demonstrate to ourselves and to others that we are no longer willing to stay as sick as our secrets. We're willing to let go of the idea that we and our experience are so unique that others cannot appreciate or empathize with them. We are willing to trust at least one other person with the truth about ourselves, which that was a big deal with me. Different people knew different parts of me. No one knew the whole Nuria. And I was scared to do this, but I was like, I got to do this. I got to trust someone. And man, when I first shared my first fifth step, like all of me, wow, I couldn't believe I did it. It felt awesome, even though it was scary. But after, it felt amazing. We're willing to be objective. We're willing to take responsibility for our recovery. I am responsible. I need to do what I need to do for my recovery. And this fifth step shows that I am taking responsibility for my recovery and that we are willing to change, looking at things differently. So over the next couple of pages, it talks about preparing for, on page 163, preparing for step 5 and, finding that right person, audience, or recipient with whom to share the fifth step is important. We don't suggest, it says parents, spouses, and children might be unsuitable because they are emotionally engaged with us and may lack the needed objectivity. Someone who's not going to get all emotional about what I'm sharing with them. And also, I don't want to hurt them with anything I might share with them. If I had judgmental opinions about them, I don't want to be sharing that with them. That would hurt them if they don't know about it, of course. My first fifth step was not with someone who had recovered from an eating disorder. And I'll tell you, she was someone from another 12-step program. She listened. She gave me feedback, and she gave me clear-cut directions on what to do after I shared my fifth step with her. She heard my fifth step. And yeah, there were times where, especially when I would talk about those things that come with an eating disorder, the disgusting things that I did in my eating disorder, like she really, because there was a lot of shame and guilt in that, right? She really didn't know how to respond. I mean, she didn't give me feedback on that because she didn't have an eating disorder, but it didn't matter. She listened and we moved forward. And she still, after, loved me and she didn't judge me and helped me get better. So as much as, it's nice if you can find someone, it's not a requirement. And it says here, it can be other members of, it can be members of other 12-step programs who have worked the steps. It can be therapists, pastors, or friends. Biggest thing for me is someone that will keep our sharing confidential. Someone you can go to that you feel that they're not going to spread your business. And it recommends creating a short list because obviously we have to let them know that it's going to take some time out of their schedule, and we have to be considerate of them and let them know what we're about to do and that we're going to need some time. And in case they don't have that kind of time, we got to, not get our feelings hurt and try somebody else. They give really nice guidelines on what to say to the fifth step recipients. And then after you plan a time and you're telling them what you're going to do, it's like, okay, let's go, and not to put more to it. What you've written is written at this point. So you've completed your 4-step, or as much as you can, like Annette said, trying to, okay, maybe we're not perfect. Maybe there's still some things that we haven't been able to address, or we remember things. Don't worry. We're going to be able to readdress these things in our nightly inventories, or, don't worry, there will be time to dig deeper, so whatever we've written, we share it, we read from what we wrote, I have to be careful because I can tend to want, it's like I want to give more of the story than what I wrote. It's like, no, like just share what you wrote. And there's going to be plenty of opportunities and discussions with the feedback that whoever is listening to your fifth step is going to give you. My experience is that there's back and forth. So once we've shared our fifth step with the recipient, it gives us clear-cut directions on page 166 about returning home. Okay. We take a quiet hour to reflect upon our experiences. During this reflection, we review our work on steps 1 through 4. Have we left anything out? Do we feel like we have made a solid beginning? Many of us experience strong emotions during and immediately after taking this step. We allow ourselves to feel whatever comes up for us at this time. There's no wrong or right way. Some people are like, oh, I feel great. Is that normal? Oh, I feel like crap. Or, oh, I feel indifferent. Or, oh, I got all this release, but then I act out my eating disorder. We allow ourselves to feel whatever comes up for us at this time. Perhaps we are still scared because we want to act out, or we want to act out because we are scared of the work ahead. Maybe we had expectations of our fifth step that we're not satisfied. Sometimes we're overwhelmed or disappointed by what we experience. At this crucial juncture, it is important that we honor the truth of what we are feeling and do not fall back into old eating disorder behaviors. So, after this hour's reflection, and this is, it's like we feel what we feel. And after this reflection, on page 167, it does give us directions to take pen to paper again for just a few minutes to write down everything for which we are grateful. If we have developed a relationship with God, we give thanks from the bottom of our hearts that we know Him better. If we have connected with a higher power or higher purpose, we express our deep appreciation for the perspective and power these can bring into our lives. We might express gratitude for the patience of the person who heard our fifth step. God, yes, for me. I felt so bad for who listened to my first fifth step. Actually, all of them. I've done multiple throughout my recovery. For new hope, yes, and new opportunities. Or we might simply give thanks for being alive. Writing this list is crucial whether we feel grateful or not. We have certainly gone through an emotionally draining experience. At moments like this, putting keywords of recovery into practice is essential. We are at our most vulnerable when overwhelmed by emotions we haven't fully processed. Writing even a short gratitude demonstrates that no matter what we are feeling, we can start to trust our growing internal strength and commitment to recover. If you go through your fifth step, including the hour of reflection and gratitude, congratulations, you are ready to move on to step 6. And that's it. That is everything I have and wanted to really discuss about step 5.
Nuria, thank you. You did a beautiful job. And I just wanted to take a moment to reflect on kind of the frustration that I know many people who haven't yet gotten to step 5 may be feeling right now. It's like, yeah, great, everybody's moving on, and here I am sitting in my wallow, And realistically, maturity means being able to deal effectively with frustration. And frustration is actually one of our 4-step topics. So if you're not done with your 4-step, guess what? You've got a new thing to add. How exciting, right? But the point is, you're not wrong to feel frustrated. This compressed workshop format really is pretty frustrating. So please give yourself a ton of credit for patience, tolerance, forgiveness, and objectivity. You guys are amazing. And really, one thing I'm going to quote Gisele, and Gisele, I know you're on the phone, is like, give yourself a little grace. The thing is, we go at this stuff with hammer and tongs. We go at this like killing snakes. And really, it's about just do it. Easy does it, as they say in AA. And just remember, we're really never done. If you're experiencing any kind of relief from engaging in this process, please know there's more and better ahead, and you'll have plenty of opportunity to revisit any areas that you feel you might have left out. So this process is really what we're doing in the workshop. It's just to walk through this process so you get more comfortable with it. And pretty soon, instead of, like, I think in that one example, it's like instead of running down a narrow ledge in the dark, it'll feel like you're ambling happily across a wide sunlit path, and it feels great, and it feels comfortable and familiar. You're like, oh yeah, this will set me back right, and it does really work that way. So I've got a few other people who might be willing to share, so I'm going to see if Gisele has anything to add on step 5.
Hi, thank you, and thank you, Nuria. You did an amazing job. I was just, she covered it really well. I want to add, for me, my experience this time, as I was working through, remain open, because during this process, things come up that I didn't even know I needed to work on. And this happened for me this time. I told Annette a couple weeks ago that I was so excited that my mom was not on my resentment list, and I was so excited. However, some family friends that knew, that were part of our life and saw our life and saw our family, they ended up being on my resentment list this time. I had to add them because I never really dealt with the anger that these people were involved in our life and watched things happen in our life, in my life, and some abuse, and never stepped in. And so I could go into that victim role, but I have recovery behind me, so I choose not to. And that is a huge thing, and I'm glad Nuria expounded on that. Is that not remaining in that victim, or not going back to that victimization, because it's easy to go there when I've been wronged. I didn't do anything. They wronged me. Well, I still have to look at me and how I react. That is how I grow and mature and recover, is looking at how I deal with it. And so, and I talked to my partner who's in recovery, and, people surround themselves when they're abusers, or, they surround themselves with people who are going to co-sign and not call them out. And so I have to look at, okay, people who are sick are usually going to surround themselves with sick people. Anyway, it's a resolution. It's a solution. But I have to talk to somebody who's in recovery, and not someone who's going to just pat me on the back. I want empathy, but I don't want to have the ability to stay in denial or go back to my old behavior. So I need to surround myself, when I'm working on this, I need to surround myself with people who are going to help me in my recovery and help me in my solution. And that's just my experience so far. And that's right. We have to, give ourselves some grace through this. You do get vulnerable and raw. And I can't, I just, what she said too is just take it easy. Take it easy on yourself. This is a process. And I didn't get everything done I needed to get done. I didn't get through all of them, and that's okay. I got what I got, and I'll give my 5th step, and I'll do more later. And it's okay. And with that, I will pass. Thank you.
Thanks, Gisele, and thanks for clarifying that you weren't finished either, because me too. All right, well, that's cool. It is challenging to do these things, but every time I do this, I do discover new and different ways of reflecting on how I relate to things, and I get more committed to doing the right things. So I always really appreciate the opportunity to work on these things. So I know that we have a few other people who might be willing to share their experiences on step 5, and we have questions for the panel. So because I don't want to skimp on questions, and I do want people who've had questions about their 4-step to have an opportunity to ask, because again, last time we were reading from the questions that people had sent in. But this time I want to make sure that we have an opportunity to have our panelists potentially share a little bit about their experiences with step 5. For anybody on the phone to ask questions about step 4, and then we'll start in on these questions here. So I'm opening the floor. We had a lot of people actually that said that they were willing to join us as sponsors, and that's really what we're looking for from panelists. But do we have questions from anybody about step 4 first that we could address as we go around? *6 to unmute, or Alt-A if you're on a computer. Okay, then in this case, we're going to go to Michelle. Michelle, you said you had either a few things to share, or you'd be willing to answer some of our questions. So do you want me to read questions, or do you want to provide a statement first?
No, I feel like everybody else covered, pretty much what I would share in terms of step 5. And I really loved hearing Gisele and Nuria. So I'm happy to go with a question if you got one.
You bet. So we have a whole series of them, but one of them is I'm uncomfortable with the idea of asking for feedback. What if I don't like or want to use the feedback I hear?
I don't like any feedback I usually hear sometimes from a sponsor because it hits me in the right spot. Because it's usually the things that bother me are the things I really need to look at. And I don't mean to be flippant about it. I mean, it's hard to make myself vulnerable, but so first of all, this is one of those things, somebody else just mentioned it, maybe it was you, Annette, about, this is like a primo, to me, something I could write on in my 4-step. What is it? What is it? Is it fear? What is it that's bothering me about the idea of feedback, right? So hopefully I do some turnarounds and I get some resolutions to that. But the other thing is, on my own power, with my own perspective, it's not like I really have a great track record with that. What my best thinking is the result of my 4-step self-reliance, brings me a lot of fear. And so this is one of the things where I have to be willing to open myself up. And the book talked about it, Nuria spoke to it as well, about hearing perspective from somebody else. I can usually, I have a friend who talks about sponsorship.
Hey guys, I'm sorry, but can you please be quiet back there?
Talk about sponsorship as holding up a mirror so that you can see yourself more clearly, right? So that my sponsor, when I talk with her, helps me see myself more clearly. And it's not that she's actually giving me answers, but it's through the process of talking and questions sometimes that she asks. Sometimes there are comments she makes which helps me see something a little more clearly. I think one of the gifts that we have in recovery, regardless of whatever you're working on in recovery, and maybe it's just the fact of a common solution, is that when I hear something that matters, that I need to pay attention to, it sounds different. It's like my heart hears it in a special way. And that's what I mean. Usually the feedback that when I'm trusting somebody, that's an important part. I'm asking it of somebody that I trust and somebody I know fairly well. And so I can trust what their feedback is. And sometimes I don't like it, but if the person knows me well, I mean, again, I have to pay attention, at least be open and willing to hear it, and maybe do a little bit more writing on it. So again, like, I kind of feel like these little things are gifts, and that they're items I can write on my 4-step and think about resolutions, because life is going to be me getting feedback that I don't like, right? That's like life. That's life in a nutshell, right? Things don't go my way. And I'm not a perfect person. I'm imperfect by design, and how am I going to walk through feedback? And some of it is, being able to take some of it to heart and being able to say, you know what, this isn't my stuff, and let me leave it. But in the context of the question, I think it deals with the 5th step. So that's what I wanted to share on that.
Thanks, Michelle. I'm going to open the floor to anyone else from the panelists who'd be willing to talk about the I don't want feedback aspect of the instructions on how to do a 5th step. All right. Well, I'm going to say a little about that because, I always thought that I wanted feedback, but when it really came down to it, I sure as heck did not. So when I read my 5th step to people, I typically rush right through it and don't pause. Now I'm going to go back a couple of places here because it does, in fact, give instructions for those giving their 5th step. And it says, try not to explain anything, just trust the process. I think Nuria mentioned that because I tend to want to go off and just explain instead of reading from the pages. That's really not a best practice, really. And why? Because we're justifying, typically. We're trying to provide the context that explains our thinking. In fact, the only thing that really matters is that we're sharing kind of the horribleness of it, not the details. Nobody needs, it's really about us being open more than it is about us telling a story. So the other thing is pausing every now and again and really looking for feedback. And at the end, asking for feedback. So why did I not want the feedback? Well, really because I'd never really grown up. And so the person that was sitting there in front of this adult, telling about all these horrible things is really just like this tiny child. And it felt awful. I felt horrifyingly vulnerable. I felt just like I had no skin, and it was like every nerve was exposed, and so there wasn't like an adult in charge, and I felt like I could be hurt. And the reality is that this whole process is about helping to make us more adult, more resilient, more flexible, more open, more like accepting of like, okay, yeah, it wasn't really that bad. I didn't really like die a million deaths. And that's a thing that I think if we are vulnerable and allow ourselves to be, it is almost like we're behaving like the adult that we need ourselves to be. And for me, that was huge. I just, I didn't really understand it until I did it. And then it was like, wow, okay, fine, that works. There's also guidance in the Big Book and in our workshop for how to be a recipient. So trying not to interrupt, making sure that you're kind of noting things relating to victimhood, and also noting the positives, because as you're hearing a 5th step, because maybe you'll be in a position to do that, you're going to see opportunities to remark on the person's openness and willingness to change, and courage, not just to share what misery they had to endure, but courage to see their part. That's the important part, because that's the part that actually sets us free. So getting balance in the feedback, maybe you're going to sit with somebody that gives you feedback that's all one-sided, and that's kind of a misery, but this is the part where if we're really relying on a God, a higher power, or a higher purpose to provide perspective, even if the person that we sat down with and chose to give our 5th step to turns out to be some kind of an evil wretch, I mean, that could happen. I mean, really, if that happens to be the case, that still doesn't really leave you vulnerable if you're truly relying on something outside yourself that is bigger than you to provide perspective and peace. So that's something I hope provides hope. And my experiences with the fifth step have not all been amazing. I've actually had a few that were pretty terrible, but I never was less than I had been before. And so I just wanted to share that with folks. So it's definitely worth going through it, even if you may not be happy with the immediate outcome. The fact that you took yourself through that process is a real big step towards maturity and freedom. I'm going to move to the next question unless anybody has comments. All right, next question. Here we go. In the past, I've gone home and resorted to old behaviors after a fifth step. I'm seriously scared of this happening again. It's such a vulnerable place to be, and how embarrassing. How can I ensure that this won't happen again? Anybody? We haven't heard from Leslie or Ellen.
Hi, thanks for calling on me. This is Leslie.
Hi, Leslie.
Hi. Well, one thing that I love about EDA is that, when the two of you and, when you started the program, you talked about how your behavior wasn't perfect, but you were getting recovery, like you were improving. And so it's not about perfection. It's about, moving in the right direction. And so even if old behaviors come up after doing a fifth step, it doesn't mean no work has been done. And so in my own experience, I've mentioned this before in other meetings, I'm still working through body image as a part of my recovery, but I don't catastrophize when I fall back into old ways of thinking. I just notice it more quickly and I'm able to move out of it more quickly. So I would say that we can't ensure that it won't happen again, but especially the vulnerability of the fifth step where we share with somebody else what is really true, exactly what Nuria said about how, just like allowing someone to see all of us completely, warts and all, as they say, is so amazing that it's a new way of being in the world. Like there's a level of honesty that that's so healing. So even if we do go back into behaviors, we have someone to say what's really happening for us. And I think that that's incredible. Like that's a step all in itself. Thanks.
Thanks, Leslie. Anybody else want to share about that sense of just like, I don't know, overwhelm at the end of the fifth step? I mean, this is one of the reasons we actually included going through that hour, and at the end of the hour, just writing out a gratitude list, even if you're not really feeling like it, because I think making sure that we continue positive patterns, even if we don't feel like it, that takes an adult. It takes maturity. It takes somebody that's engaged and committed to the process, regardless of the immediate results. It's like, our behaviors, the symptoms, they're a lagging indicator of recovery. They're not a leading indicator. If we do the right things and we start, going through the right ways of thinking, the things that bring perspective and peace, if we start relying on that instead of our behaviors, the behaviors will go away. Like Dr. Hall shared in the doctor's opinions, we'll no longer have our eating disorders when we no longer need them. And so after something like a fifth step, you may feel very emotionally just like all over the place. And that's why I really loved what Nuria read, because it's so important that we just be like, okay, my emotions are all over the place. and just let that be. Don't get all caught up in it. Because I think when we are overwhelmed, that is usually when we're most vulnerable and prey to old patterns. So I will stop talking. And anybody else want to share on that before we move on?
Hi, it's Michelle. How are you? I just wanted to add one thing. I'm very ritual based and in terms of like marking things. And so I'm not saying that this would help necessarily with feeling after a fifth step particularly, I don't know. All I'm saying is that things like, for me, I did a lot of acting out at home. And it's been really important for me to have a safe place at home, like to create a place in my home, which is a safe place that's not where this memory of my eating disorder is, right? And so it took a little bit of effort, and I'm visual. So I just created a space, right? And so for me, like, that hour is really special. And it's something that I use to turn things around. And that gratitude list that the book talks about is just such a lovely, like, end of the process, not end of the process, but you know what I'm saying? Like, it marks the end of something that was really a big deal. And I think that being in a place where I feel safe, that I've created for myself, and whether it's a certain kind of ritual, to kind of like shift the energy, is really powerful to me. And the hour is really important to me. And sometimes it means, reaching out to a friend after that or whatever. And remembering that, like, this is the opening of a door, right? The opening of 6 and 7. So it's, I don't know, I just kind of like to try to reframe it. Helps me too, because I know my mind will go to, oh, it's negative, and there's a whole different, like, balance and perspective. There's a whole different perspective, and that gratitude just kind of opens that perspective up. And I think there are a lot of different ways to look at it as well. So that's all I wanted to add.
Thank you, Michelle. I love that idea. It really is fantastic. I have a space too, but I didn't put that much work into it. Anyway, good. Anyone else? Next question. There aren't any EDA meetings in my area. How do I find someone with whom to do a 5th step? Anybody speak from experience on that one?
Hi, this is Ellen.
Hi, Ellen.
Hi, I can speak to that because when I did my first 5th step in EDA, there were no meetings in my area, and but we had the telephone meetings that existed through EDA, and so I was able to find somebody over the telephone that was in the EDA that I was able to do my 5th step with, and it was a really big blessing to be able to do that. I found somebody that had been in the program for a while, and was also familiar with 12-step recovery, just like me, and was committed to their recovery as well. And actually, to be honest with you, we both did our 5th steps for each other. She shared hers with me, and I shared mine with her because we were both going through the steps together, which is a little different than, we might do it now because there's more sponsors that are available now. At that time, we didn't have a lot of sponsors that were available, so we were doing more co-sponsorship. But anyway, but I think that there are many options that, can be available. There's finding people over the phone lines. In the book it talks about finding, if you have a therapist that you want to share it with, a close friend. Nuria had commented earlier that the most important thing is that it's someone that will not betray the confidence. And I think also that it's important that it's not going to be family members or spouses and such. But anyway, I think that's all that I've got to share on that. But I really do think that there are avenues that are available out there if we are open open to it. So anyway, thanks.
Thank you, Ellen. You brought up a lot of great points. So what we're really hearing is that it doesn't matter that you find another EDA member even to necessarily hear your fifth step. The key part is that they be able to keep a confidence that they have a perspective that you think you might benefit from. And so from that angle, a lot of folks might be in a position where they can provide feedback, or and people that you admire, people that you respect, and usually people who are in counseling type positions, so pastors, other trusted resources, anybody that that you really genuinely trust to give you good sound advice is a valid person. And I'm going to go on to the next question, which is like, is it okay to do a fifth step with somebody via phone or teleconference service like Skype or Zoom? And the answer is, well, of course it is. However, that's probably, and I'm going to answer this, I really do think that there's tremendous value in having eye contact and physically being in the same room as somebody, and getting to feel the human connection. I've done fifth steps with people over the phone. I've done fifth steps with people over Skype, FaceTime, so that you can actually see people's faces. That helps a little. But honestly, if you can be in the same room with somebody, it's just, I don't know. There's a human dimension that comes from hearing the full, I don't know, auditory and seeing the full human expression of them with you and you with, it's a different experience. So I would highly encourage people to try to go for somebody local, and you may find a new friend. So, okay. Anyway, does anybody else have anything on the next two questions? So no EDA meetings in my area, and can I use the phone or Skype or Zoom? All right. Last question that we had that came in was really about working on building, like sometimes people are really working on building stronger relationships with the spouse. And, if they're not on I don't know, my husband doesn't actually show up on my fifth step or fourth step a lot, because it's like we worked through a lot of stuff, and that it makes a big difference. And I keep thinking, well, shouldn't they know all of me? And the answer is, well, yes, but I want to hear what other people think about that idea, because we do mention it in the big book. If people were listening to that, they said not family members, right? Why not? Or if you want to argue the other cause, why do you think that might not be such a bad idea?
Hi, it's Leslie from New York calling in.
Hi, Leslie.
Speaking again. Well, Nuria mentioned about how that can cause harm and just lead to more that you have to put on your fourth step or on your 10th step. Because, if we're supposed to be really unburdened when we do our fourth step, and that's not useful in those close relationships. Yeah, I think the guidance in the big book is true, that it's not a good idea.
Yeah, hi, it's Michelle too. I really liked what Nuria and Leslie both said, and I think that the objectivity is also talked about in the big book. But I think my husband was really scared by my eating disorder, and I think for me to really read that, even though he was on the resentment list or whatever, I mean, that would have been kind of mean for me to basically go through, the source says related to him, my first one. But, I think he would have been scared if I had read through some of the other stuff. And he knows me really well, but I think that just the depth of that, and he wouldn't have had the perspective, he wouldn't have had the objectivity. And I had mentioned it on one of the phone calls about over-relying on him once we moved. I need to form relationships, adult relationships with girls, with women in this area, and not use my husband for everything and expect him to be everything to me. And I can be close to him. I have a friend of mine who talks about relationships as being 100-100, not 50-50. Then my job is to be the best that I can and bring that to the relationship. And so that's kind of why, I was lucky enough to have an EDA sponsor to do the fifth step with. And for me, the family is just really, it would be problematic in a lot of different ways. So I just wanted to add that as well.
Thank you, Michelle. That's great. Great to hear the reinforcement, and Leslie also. But even if we don't have eating disordered behaviors that might shock, scare, terrify a family member, there's a level of, I don't know, objectivity that somebody that isn't emotionally engaged with us can bring to any picture. And it's worth going out, even though it's risky and it's frightening to go reach out to others. It's important to do that. Remember the legs of the chair example? I think it's super important to invest in relationships inside the family, outside the family, and with other folks. So I also wouldn't recommend using a coworker for very similar reasons. You need to have different sets of folks, not so that you can be this like trifurcated person, or so different people with different groups of friends, but so that you can get support from lots of different quarters if there is more than one area that seems kind of messed up at the moment. Because if you've got teenagers, they may hate you. If you've got trouble at work, you need to rely on family and friends, and it's like having a balance in the way you get perspective is also really important. So I know we're running out of time. Yeah, go ahead. Please go
Annette?
ahead. Yeah, sure.
It's Nuria from Charleston, South Carolina. I also wanted to say, we're only at step 5. We have like 7 more steps to go. And, part of 6 and 7 is doing character building things. And there's great opportunities where a partner is going to be able to build a stronger relationship through character building activities of step 7. And then you get to 8 and 9, we're making amends, and that's when we can own up to, what we need to, and that's going to create a stronger relationship. And then 10, 11, which is day-to-day stuff, how we're going to treat them differently, how we're going to, be more considerate. There are for the rest of the steps, we are going to be presented with so many additional tools for day-to-day activities that will help us be able to build a stronger relationship with our spouse.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Nuria. I loved hearing that. That was a fantastic cap to this. So thank you. And we are going to wrap up. Normally we do reference the 7th tradition. We're not going to pass the hat, as it were, but we do have a PayPal site. If you're an EDA member, you have to be a member. And again, you can be a member by declaring that you want to recover from an eating disorder. Please do contribute as you can. And we use that money just to pay for books that go to new meetings. We host the website and so forth. We have no other overhead. This is a completely volunteer organization. Okay, we're going to talk a little bit here about what's coming up for next week. But before we do, I just want to point out that if you're not really done with your 4th step, please know that as you go through the rest of the steps in this workshop, you will be building additional you'll be acquiring more tools and building the confidence and the resilience that you really need to do a even better job on your 4th step next time around. So don't let where you're at right now dissuade you from just moving forward with whatever you've got. Giselle's going to do it, I'm going to do it, and I'd love to encourage all of you to do the same. Once we've outlined a way of thinking that enables us to live in peace and dignity, as we've started to with that resolutions column, it doesn't really do too much good unless we follow through on those plans. And that's where chapter into action, what we're going through right now, explains how to go about clearing up that blockage that's been keeping us from doing what we know we need to do. So being accountable to ourselves, to God, and to another human being, that's step 5, is not only about what was done for us, nor what we have had to endure, past and present, but our own dysfunctional thinking and action, and that uncomfortable work is most essential in building us into the people that we most need and want to be. So building objectivity, providing outside perspective, and demonstrating willingness to take responsibility for our own recovery is what will create that transformative process that Dr. Carl Jung first described to an AA member, or what would be a future AA member many, many years ago. This is about a fundamental transformation. Step 5, into action, is where it starts to happen. So if you haven't yet done so, your assignments for next week are to complete your 5th step, even if you feel like there's more left to do. The point of the workshop, again, is practicing the process. Please complete Step Workshop worksheets, pages 23 and 24 as you do that, and prepare for doing Step 6. So next week we're doing Step 6. Read EDA Big Book pages 168 to 172 and go through workshop worksheets pages 25 and 26. All right. Listen, thank you all so much, especially to Nuria, to Gisele, to Michelle, Leslie, Ellen. I'm so grateful that you were on the call supporting us all, and I wish you all a wonderful week. Looking forward to talking to you again soon. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for your service.
Oh, wait, we normally say a closing prayer, don't we? Sorry about that, I forgot. We normally round up with the we version of the Serenity Prayer. *6 to unmute. All right, on the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. God, grant us the serenity to accept the things we cannot change, the courage to change the things we can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Keep coming back. It works if we work it.
And we are all worth it.
And we're worth it. Yay!
Yay.
Thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful week.
Thank you.
You too. Thank you.